people generally classify, authenticity as like a moral position
Hmm.
and putting on this facade of, the profile, the profilicity, like an immoral position.
Right.
But you're
Exactly.
you're talking about it like in a very neutral way. Do you
Yes.
give any credence to the people that think authenticity is more moral?
Well, I think we all grew up in the age of authenticity. I don't know about you. I don't know exactly how old you are, but at least I did. So, in that sense, it's something that I still built my identity with, and most people did it. But at the same time, I think it's entirely paradoxical and actually impossible to be authentic, right? We learn authentic, like with a Vieta, from someone else, and the more intentionally we try to be authentic, the more obvious the paradox becomes, right?
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks. I cannot see you. Is that supposed to be the case?
My camera is going into OBS into our live stream, so we're live right now. So obviously,
Okay.
just to let you know, hopefully that's okay.
Sure.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Sorry again about if I'm not familiar with this kind of format. Am I supposed to have my camera turned on or turned off?
I have you in the stream, so we can see you. Yeah, on is fine. If you're not comfortable being on camera, then you don't have to turn
No,
it
I'm
on.
comfortable. I just want to know what's kind of the etiquette is. I'm not sure.
I mean, your mic is like super loud and somewhat distorted. Is it coming through the correct mic and not like the wrong audio source?
I'm not sure, but I don't think I have much of an alternative. Let me check.
If you go to Zoom in the bottom,
let me check. Okay, maybe this is better. Is this better now?
sounds completely the same.
Yeah.
Okay, then there's nothing I can do.
Are you using like a laptop microphone, or are you using a?
Yes.
Okay, it is
okay.
what it is.
Okay.
I mean, it sounds okay to me, but.
Okay, I'll try not to speak too loud.
That's fine. Okay.
Well, I'm a huge fan of your videos. So you've done some great videos on Philosophy Tube, obviously. You did a video on Jordan Peterson that I think I responded to and was a bit critical of, but I have read your book and I understand the Profelicity argument that you're making. And I mean, I'm really intrigued by it. I'm really fascinated by it. This, well, first let me start. Why don't you just introduce yourselves for people who might not have heard of your channel?
Okay, yeah, thanks first of all for your very kind words. I'm glad you like the book and the videos. Yeah, so my name is obviously Hans-Georg Müller. I teach philosophy at the University of Macau, which is close to Hong Kong and is a special autonomous region, or small city actually, in China. One of the main reasons why I'm here is because I have a background actually in Chinese philosophy and Chinese studies. But throughout my academic career, intellectual development, I became more and more interested not so much in early China, but in contemporary society and contemporary issues. So the book that you were referring to, you and your profile, which I co-wrote with my former student Paul D'Ambrosio, is about identity, and that is the main topic that I'm interested in now. How do people shape their identity? But my maybe one more sentence. So my approach is, on the one hand, influenced by contemporary social theory, social systems theory, but on the other hand, also still this background in Chinese philosophy is also a significant influence on how I look at identity. So there's a cross-cultural element in it.
So it's the thing that's very fascinating to me about it is right now there is this interesting dialogue about social media and whether social media is dangerous to society or to people psychologically. There's all this different stuff going on. And we're huge fans of Jonathan Haidt on the show. I've read all of John's books. I did a video for John on moral foundations theory, and I've been able to have a little back and forth with him via email. So he's working on a book now that is critical of social media, and I emailed him because like your book is one of the few books that it has this really interesting way of imagining social media that's not necessarily derogatory.
Right.
And there's another book that I'm a fan of. I think it's Stephen Johnson. I think the book is called Everything Bad is Good for You, where he goes through all the evolving technology and how everybody just instinctively thought this new technology was going to destroy mankind. I mean, he goes back to like writing and books and like recorded music. All of this stuff was supposed to destroy society, and every single time it actually makes people smarter. And in your book, you talk about this thing called second order observation, which I think, I'll let you take over from here to kind of explain it. But it really is this interesting concept about how it is a new skill that we're learning.
Right. So, the term second order observation is from this German social theorist Niklas Luhmann. I said earlier I'm influenced by that. So what does it mean? It basically means you look at something not simply directly, but you look at it via how it is being observed. And I like to give like two core examples for this mode of observation that I think is now ubiquitous. Everyone operates within this mode. And it is central to modern society. It's like to live in modern society means to live in the mode of second order observation. Let me just give like the two core examples that I like to give is, number one, the emergence of the notion of the picturesque. This was an aesthetic notion like in the 18th century, and it has to do with the new media at that time, with magazines and journals. And it simply means that you look, for instance, that was an aesthetic category regarding landscape painting. And when people looked at painting earlier than that, whatever, like painting of a person, they would just look at the painting and then they say, oh, it's a good painting, it looks like the person. So they would compare they look at the painting and then compare it with the person they've seen. But this changes then in the 18th century with the notion of the picturesque, where people look, for instance, at a landscape and then say, oh, the landscape looks like a painting, it's a nice landscape. So they look at the landscape no longer just merely directly, but they look at it in terms of how they viewed pictures of a landscape. So they already have this second order observation in mind, that they look something as it is being or has been observed by others. And then more importantly, and much more close to us, I mean, we still live we still operate in the mode of the picturesque all the time. But socially, economically, this gets much more important than with the emergence of the brand in the 19th century, right? So in the economy and commerce, right, where now you no longer buy shoes or buy milk or whatever, you buy a certain brand of shoes or a certain brand of milk or any drink. So we're completely used now to see everything that we're buying in terms of the brand, which again is second order observation, right? You cannot just see a shoe. You always see the shoe in terms of the brand of the shoe. And that's also second order observation. And then this becomes so prevalent in the economy, right? Or whatever. Now, even in my field, in the university, you have all these university rankings and all the universities have to brand themselves. And eventually you also brand yourself, which basically means that you shape yourself for being observed in the mode of second order observation by others. And that's what we call, that's our core notion, profile. Right? If the personal branding results in the construction, in the curation, actually, of profiles. And so the core thesis of the book is, the subtitle is Identity After Authenticity, that this kind of identity shaping mode that preceded profelicity, authenticity, namely, is going away, and that now increasingly everyone is just shaping their identity in the form of shaping profiles, and this, of course, is obviously the case on social media, where we actually took the term from. Right, you have to have we all have our different profiles on social media, yeah, so that's just a new form of shaping identity. And regarding the technology, the social media and generally, like new technology, new media, we think that the success of that, it's not that profelicity is there because of social media, but rather the other way around. That profelicity has been there for a long time, right? I mentioned branding, which has been there since more than a century, 2 centuries maybe, and that the way these new technologies are used and the huge effect they have on our life, that's basically because of profelicity. Profelicity was already there. And the way social media and new media are used, and the reason that they are so successful is because they are such great tools for enhancing profelicity. If I may say just a short final thing with the technology, if you like for instance, printing as a technology had a huge effect in early modernity in Europe, and then of course in North America as well. But it had been invented in China a few centuries earlier, and there it had very little effect. So it's not that a technology sort of automatically takes off. It really takes off, and especially it takes off in the way it does if it somehow fits into certain social needs that it can serve. So right. That's basically the theory of the book.
Yeah, profile building, and you mentioned this in the book, like profile building, certain people did have access to profile building in the past because, obviously there's famous people, celebrities, people in the media who have access to this feedback loop about how they're being viewed on TV or how, their celebrity is being viewed. And social media is kind of the democratization of those tools that others have had access to. Yeah, that's the thing. And this is the divide. And I shared with you a response that I did to Jonathan Haidt, because Jonathan Haidt is he's very much against social media. A lot of people are against social media. And I'm trying to when I look at it through your lens, it's more of like a tool of identity creation that some people will be successful at and other people's will not be successful at. But that's like any vocation, right? Some people are good at sports. Some people are, good at scholastics. Some people are good at math. Just because everyone is not good at something doesn't mean that thing is bad for society, or that just because certain people are demoralized because they're bad at math, that it's a tragedy. We just point them towards something they might be better at.
Yes, but I guess, everyone somehow has to build a profile, just as somehow everyone has to do math, right? You don't have to be, there are only very few. What's that?
Do they need to, though? That's my question.
Yeah, everyone has to be able to count and make simple calculations. Otherwise, you can't exist. You can't have a bank account or anything.
I mean, on the profile basis. I guess that's a good analogy.
I think the same is the case with the profile, right? Okay. That's the whole point. As you said, correctly, right? In the past, only a few people, celebrities, right? They had a profile, and no one else had a profile. And now everyone has profile, has a profile. Most people actually have several. And that's normal. That doesn't mean that everyone is actually a celebrity. Just like not everyone is actually whatever, a math wizard. But everyone has to build profiles and has to build their identity in the form of a profile. Like in my job too, right? I mean, everyone has to build up a CV, whatever. When you go to college, you choose a college that you go to. You post anything on social media. That's all part of profile building. So everyone operates in this mode. So just as everyone has to learn somehow basic maths. And that's really the point, that everyone is building profiles. Of course, again, it's understood that not everyone is going to be like super high profile. Most people are still kind of low profile.
Right. So yeah,
but the point you made about Jonathan Haidt in the tweet you sent me, go
ahead. Expand on it. I mean, I'm interested in the where you're at on Jonathan Haidt's like mission to kind of rethink social media.
I watched the whole interview I had with Lex Friedman, and I found it very interesting. And I'm generally very sympathetic, both to his previous work and what he's doing now. I think the stuff he's doing is really, really good. And I think obviously also his observations about the problems with social media are kind of spot on. And he's pointing in particular to this kind of, I think he calls it like even like something like a epidemic or so about mental health issues, especially among young girls, like age something like 8 to 14 or so, I don't remember exactly. And that there's been like a suicide wave among them, right?
Sure.
And he says that is directly correlated, and he has the empirical research on this, to social media use, and specifically to posting on Instagram and similar sites. So not just whatever, looking at internet content, but, and he doesn't use the word, I think he should use the term. So I think it would help his theory, because that's when we learn profile building, right? That's how now everyone learns to build their identity, and at an early age. So he reports this very interesting fact that that young teenagers, or even younger, go on the internet, start building their profiles, and they somehow do not succeed, and they somehow get whatever, depressed or kill themselves. And so he thinks that's really bad, because it's not like really traditional child play, which I think he has a very good point, right? Traditionally, people would do unsupervised play. They would like whatever, go out and play on the street or in the woods or whatever. And they're no longer doing this, and now they're growing up on social media, and there are all these pressures. And then he has the radical suggestion. He thinks it should be regulated, that internet shouldn't be accessible to people below the age of 16 or something like this. So you responded to this, and I think the tweet I saw, I think that's spot on, right? That what the kids are actually doing there is they learn second order observation. They learn to build their identity in this way, and therefore it's actually indispensable, because that's what they have to learn in order to build identity in the way now identity is built in society. But obviously they run into problems. So I don't think Haidt's solution is really the right solution. And I think you're saying the same thing, that, you just block people's access to social media. I think the problem lies deeper. I've reflected on this in the past week or two, and I was thinking of this. I don't know if you heard of this. It's a German novel. The English title is The Sorrows of the Young Werther, or Werther, which was written by the famous author Goethe in the 18th century. And that novel, it was published 1774. That was a huge success. And it's about a young man committing suicide. And it became like super fashionable and is still until today one of the most famous German novels. But the point I'm trying to make is at the time it caused a suicide wave,
Right.
At least people say so. And it's a copycat suicide. And I wonder if we have a similar, if the phenomena that Haidt observes is similar to this called the Vieta Effect. There's even the term, the Vieta Effect.
Social contagion, is that basically
yes,
what it is? Okay.
Yes, but for two reasons. Number one, sorry, let me go back. This 74 book, that was the time when we had a transition from what I call sincerity to authenticity. Sincerity is the old role-based model of identity building, right? That you're born into a certain role, mostly gender roles, but also professional roles, and whether you're an aristocrat or you're a farmer. And so your whole identity is very much built by yourself learning to identify yourself with this socially ascribed and fixed role. And then when modernity comes in the 17th, 18th century, this is no longer seen as good. You want to be authentic instead, right? This role orientation is regarded as just being conformist, and everyone has to develop their unique and original and creative self. That's authenticity. So we have basically, at that time, a transition from one mode of identity shaping, sincerity, sincere commitment to roles, to a new form of identity building, authenticity, developing your true self and finding out who you are and being your real self and stuff like this, which you have to find internally, and then build your external self in accordance as a true representation of your true inner self. And exactly that's the theme of that novel, right? So this Vieta guy who is like, whatever, 18 years old or something like this, or 20, is a love triangle, and he is in love with this girl who is about to be married to an older guy, and it's all arranged to, you know, the social rank and so forth. So he can't really fit. His rank is too low, and his unhappy love affair, and he develops his authenticity as a young man, but he can't succeed in society. And the love affair, the failure in the love affair, is kind of a symbol of the failure of his building authenticity in a society that is still kind of governed by the old rules of sincerity and rank and social status and these things. And then he commits suicide and becomes this kind of hero. And again, this novel instantly becomes a huge, huge success. It's actually outlawed, I think, in Italy and other countries. And people start dressing like Vieta, and people start committing suicide all over the place. And again, I wonder if that's something similar, that the core phenomenon that Haidt describes, the suicide wave, if that isn't similar to the Vieta effect in two respects. Number one, as you just said, like it's kind of this, you know, contagious, you know, suicide is somehow contagious. But why is that? I mean, because somehow at that time it confirms your authenticity, right? It confirms that you know you're not really following social convention, and it's kind of a big sign that you give to kind of paradoxically affirm your selfhood as a protest, right? By not conforming. And so you see this model, and so some people only dress like Vieta because they want to be as authentic as him, and which is of course entirely paradoxical, right? So they want to be non-conformist by being like him, right? He's unlike everyone else, and they want to be like him, unlike everyone else, which is entirely paradoxical. But anyways, so. The question is, isn't this somehow similar for these two reasons? Number one, it's a copycat phenomenon, again, which I don't really know, but I suppose if this is happening on social media, people will know about these suicides, the kids, and it's known to be contagious. Suicide is known to be contagious. But then secondly, and maybe more importantly, that just as at that time it was the suicide wave came at the time of the transition between one identity mode and another, sincerity and authenticity. Now we're going through this transition from authenticity to profelicity. And so it's that this new mode of profile building for the new kids, they're already like in it. for the young kids. They're already like in it. But at the same time, and again, like with hate, they don't get support. Everyone, just like at 250 years ago, people were expected to be sincere, to be committed to their roles and whatever, be a good housewife and stuff like this. Now, people are still supposed to be, the kids are supposed to develop their authenticity. That's the education ideal we all grew up with, right? That's why you go to school and we get an education. Everyone's supposed to develop their individuality to become who they are and to, but that's not how the world actually functions anymore.
Right.
The world already is prophilic. And that's why I wonder if Haidt is actually doing a disservice to his good cause, right? He wants to have the children suffer less. But I think the children are under enormous pressure to be authentic in a world where authenticity is fading out, and they need to be prophilic. But they don't get support in that. And we don't, the parents want them to be authentic. They don't want them to be on social media. And the whole of society is in this I think that's really the core characteristic of the society we're in right now. That we still have this the ideal, the vocabulary of authenticity, but we already function in the mode of profelicity. And so these kids, they are still pressured by the expectations to develop an authenticity, but at the same time, they live in social media where it's all about profile building. And so they feel misunderstood. They have no orientation. They have no guidance. In fact, they get criticized, whatever, for being narcissists, right?
Right.
But they have to be narcissists, and it's not narcissists. They're actually not narcissists, right? They're just already practicing the new form of identity building. So I think what people like Haidt should actually do, they should understand the phenomenon better. With the help of the notion of profelicity, they should acknowledge this transition that's going on and that is inevitable. And they should, rather than criticize these young kids and tell them you shouldn't go on the internet, they should understand the phenomenon better. And I think that's exactly what we were saying in this tweet, and understand that they are in the process of building their own identity in the form of second order observation. And we should, number one, understand it, and number two, then support them instead of criticizing them for it and saying, no, you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't go on social media.
Is it?
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. And this is fascinating. I'm so glad you're elucidating on this. Is sincerity, authenticity, are those other forms of identity that others have studied, or are those your ideas? I don't know anything on this topic, so. Yeah,
the notions of sincerity and authenticity are not our ideas. So I wrote the book together with Paul.
Right, I thought, so other philosophers have talked about this stuff. So you don't need to really go in on that. I'm curious. My question is whether or not authenticity or profelicity, like my gut intuition is that profelicity is less pressure than authenticity, but we have all of society like pushing people, like pressuring them into authenticity. When profelicity, so many of these kids, they have like 10 profiles and they're experimenting, and any one of them they can throw away at any time. So it's a lot less pressure.
Potentially, yes. I mean, again, like the pressure comes from the outside because of the conflict with authenticity. Right. Which the whole society is kind of in this pressure and in this kind of self-contradiction. But then, of course, there can also be profelicity pressures, whatever. You get negative feedback. And then also you're always kind of in an anxiety. Will my profile really be successful? Will I get enough? Like, I'm now a YouTuber, right? I'm always worrying if I get enough views, if the next video has as many views or ideally more than the previous one, right? And that becomes a concern. Now, I'm old and I'm not really taking it that seriously anymore. But if I was a teenager, it would be much more serious, these kind of considerations. And then, of course, so you can fail. Like you can fail with anything, as you said earlier, right? You want high profile, but most people just have low profile. So that's a constant pressure. That's, I guess, the major pressure. And the second pressure is also from my own experience. Just thought about it this morning, right? I haven't posted. I didn't do a new video on my channel since 2 weeks, right? And
you're a YouTuber now.
Yes, yeah. So that causes stress, right? I gotta post something, right? If you don't continuously post, you're dead.
So one more thing on the Profelicity stuff, and then I want to turn it over to Sitch. My buddy we want to talk to you a little bit about like wokeness and your video on wokeness.
Right.
I read this book. Everyone is getting super triggered because I keep talking about it, but there's a transformation that happens in the book that's very fascinating in light of this Profelicity idea. So the book is Kellyanne Conway's new book about her experience in the Trump administration. Now, I don't know if you followed any of this drama, but Kellyanne Conway was Trump's campaign manager, okay? And she basically helped get him elected. And then her and her husband were going to move to Washington, D.C., and her husband was going to get a job in the Trump administration. And he didn't necessarily get the job that he wanted to, but her husband became an outspoken Trump critic on social media. His name is George Conway, and he basically was elevated to stardom as this Trump critic, with his wife being one of the chief supporters of Trump. Do you know the background on this, or?
Very vaguely. I remember the names, but not really the details of the story.
So, but you'll find this fascinating because in the book, George never had a Twitter, was never interested in Twitter, and Kellyanne Conway basically explains this. But his first tweet was definitely someone in the realm of authenticity who knew nothing about second order observation. He said anybody with any practice in second order observation would patently realize, okay, this is a mistake. Don't do this. This is something that you shouldn't do. And so he develops this social media addiction, and you can tell it's basically him exploring this idea of second order observation. But if you don't understand the difference in the two identity formation tools, the authenticity versus the Profelicity, this situation I don't think would be as meaningful as it would be to someone like you and I. So yeah. It's fascinating.
That sounds yes, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And again, the same like with height, right? If you have these two concepts and apply them, it can be very useful, and it can explain a lot of things that otherwise you can't really see that clearly.
Yeah.
Because it's a shared experience. It's so many people share this experience in one way or another.
Well, and
I do too.
We also, I mean, we're not like some YouTubers are giant, obviously, but we have a community here that, we do a show and share in an experience that's not, I like to think it's a positive thing in the world, not necessarily a negative thing. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very glad I did the channel, which I also, it was like maybe like this Conway, it was like very coincidental, and I didn't intend it, but it just happened. Because of my PhD student who did the whole thing. Now I'm really glad I did it, because it's such an interesting experience, and has made my life more interesting. Absolutely.
Yeah. You read the comments on, you put something out into the world, and you're seeing so many different perspectives, and you really are
it's so much better than the academic world, which is very boring, and so the feedback is much more intense, and so that's also a prejudice, right? that is somehow, it's all somehow, because it's second order, it's second hand, but it's actually a very like intense experience and an intense exchange and lively. So I don't think I think it's more lively than the traditional academic world, much more lively.
It's interesting because I think generally when people conceptualize it, they're like, oh, if someone leaves you like a nasty comment on a YouTube video or something, because of the fact that they're not talking to you, face to face, because they have like a username, like that's a truer reflection of their like inner self. But you're kind of saying it's like the opposite of that because they're sort of performing for everyone else.
Yeah, but this performance is, I mean, it's kind of child play or so, right? Where you also like think back when you were like children, you did like child play. You were like, that's also a very intense form of interaction with others, and of also, even though it's authenticity, vocabulary of exploring yourself, right? Of exploring possibilities. And so it has this kind of playfulness. And as you said, Adam, earlier, I mean, Jonathan Haidt is doing the same thing, right? He's very much present on the internet too. That's how I learned about his new ideas.
I would never have a relationship with Jonathan Haidt without the world of Profelicity.
Right.
Yeah. I would never,
Yes.
this conversation would never be happening between us.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
So Sitch, you want to talk about wokeness?
Well, before we get to that, because I mean, I don't agree with sort of limiting the internet for kids either. But do you have any, like, what would be a solution or something to do about, suicide rates, kids having all sorts of emotional problems based around social media and stuff?
Well, again, I'm not a social psychologist. I'm not a therapist, but
well, neither are we, but we like to talk about.
Yeah, no. Again, I think it would help. And this is like I'm apologizing for only making such an abstract suggestion rather than a more concrete suggestion, but I'm a philosopher. So what I think what would help is if we would have a better conceptual understanding of what's going on, and would not just expect, like generally, either as parents or generally as a public, of which Haidt is a part, the kids to be authentic in a time where that's no longer really the thing to be, right? So we should change the expectations towards the identity building and the understanding of what identity building is. At the same time, of course, it makes sense to introduce some form of regulations, whatever. I think it makes sense to somehow, shield kids, whatever, from pornography or from violence or these kind of things. Again, I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any kind of evidence to back that up, but intuitively that makes sense to me. But Haidt makes this point, which I think is very important, about unsupervised play as being, so if there could be something, if I don't know how to do that, some form of internet or social media space that somehow is unsupervised play on social media, I think that would be actually a good thing. But I don't know how to do this concretely to make it at the same time somehow a safe space, which unsupervised play is by definition somewhat unsafe. That's the whole purpose of it.
Right. Well, wouldn't people talking on anonymous message boards or playing video games with people they don't know, wouldn't that be unsupervised play?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it should be understood in this way.
Right. Well, it's interesting because they're trying to crack down on all that stuff. You're right. Like, it's interesting because, like, physically, there's a physical danger generally associated with like unsupervised, kids playing that sort of, at least in America, has been like cracked down on. And now with the internet, it's like there's this fear of emotional damage coming from unsupervised kids playing on the internet, and it's like everything has to be cracked down. Everything has to be safe now.
Yeah, but as a matter of fact, I hope I don't get this wrong, but I think Haidt was the one, I'm pretty sure he was the one who said it, but that's like a fact, right? That unsupervised play is very important for growing up healthily, for build. It's dangerous, but at the same time, it's absolutely essential.
Right. I think he says that you basically kids have to figure out how to solve problems themselves, and we're basically stealing that away from them until
Right.
you shovel them off to
Exactly.
college, and even then, colleges have kind of become more safe spaces too. So
Exactly. Yes.
yeah.
So let's fight about Marxism.
All right.
Well, you had a video, it was like over a year ago, I think, about wokeism, and you said something in it that I really really love, and then you said something in it that I don't agree with, and
Mm,
the thing that I love was you were talking about how wokeness is a civil religion, which I think
right.
is 100% on the money, and you talk about this concept of guilt pride, which is basically you talk about kind of like in reference to the Germans post World War
Right.
II, and how if you have people that have this tremendous guilt for some past transgressions that either they or their ancestors committed, they some way in which people seem to deal with it is that they kind of take pride in the fact that they are admit so much guilt over it, and in
Yes.
essence it can kind of be weaponized to like chastise other people, I guess, for
Yes.
being guilty themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's totally right. I think that's exactly a huge part of wokeism. The part that I guess I didn't really understand, was that you said that you conceptualize wokeism as a neoliberal conception, and
Mm,
you were contending that it was neoliberal versus Jordan Peterson, who calls it sort of a Marxist conception.
right. Yeah. Thanks for summarizing my point so succinctly and so nicely. That's exactly the main point. And I've just been thinking about this last night. I had an email conversation with a friend, also former PhD student, who is more on the woke side, but also critical of it, but much more on the woke side than I. And he did some satirical piece on cancel culture. And in this piece, he mentions, so that's about cancel culture, which is, of course, a central part of wokeism, right?
Right.
And in this piece, he mentions he does this like ironically, satirically, kind of constructs a history of cancel culture, and mentions one thing which he did ironically, but I think it's actually not ironic. He mentions a religious practice of the Amish people, which is called shunning. And they use it, even the
Yes.
German word Meidung. You know about this?
Yes, where they won't talk to you. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I didn't know about this, right? And this shows, I think, for me immediately, again, the whole kind of religious, that wokeism for me, as you said, is for me a civil religious phenomenon. It's a secularized form of religion, right? And so America is so religious, right? I mean, that's how your whole country was founded, by these religious fundamentalists who were even too fundamentalist for Europe, which at that time was still a fundamentalist Christian society. And then they had to go to America to be even more fundamentalist. And it seems to me that America never got over it, right? And so wokeism is kind of the civil religious occupation of something that was moving away from religion, that was more like a political thing. But even that, I mean, the social justice was always very religious. Look at someone like Martin Luther King or so, who's also, of course, strongly religious background. So, but then with the Vietnam protests and so forth and the hippies, it became more secular, but it never really lost its kind of religiousness. And now the religiousness in wokeism strikes back so big. And one element, again, is cancel culture, which is basically an Amish practice. Right, where you shun people who are not as radical in their pronouncement, and just move away a little bit from what is expected, and then they get shunned. And the point is really, and I was thinking about this, that you really it's not really only the shunning is against those within your flock who are somehow not right. And you see this again, like the same thing with cancel culture, where like the people like Brett Weinstein or so whoever, right? They were people who are actually kind of liberal, and but they are the main victims, not the ones necessarily who are on the right, right? So I think it's kind of this Puritanism, this kind of moralistic, civil religious Puritanism. That's a kind of another revival movement in America that is now operating on a secular basis. And I think that's very much at the heart of wokeism. And it now, of course, it comes back to Europe as well, and it's very strong there too. And yes. And the German, as my point is coming from, which is where I experienced this guilt pride development in Germany. I left Germany 20 years ago, but still, that is the defining element of German civil religion. Exactly this process as you described it. So we admitted the greatest guilt, but because we were able to admit the greatest guilt, we are now somehow morally superior to everyone else. Kind of also very interesting paradoxical reversal. And that's very similar to what basically wokeism used exactly this phenomenon, right? This mechanism. And, whatever, we've been racist in the past, but now we admit to it, and that makes us somehow morally superior.
Right.
And then we criticize everyone else who's not 100% in line with this, and thereby we prove our own kind of regained purity. So this is a religious phenomenon. But then you were criticizing. Can you repeat the critical point again?
Well, you said you were saying that you thought that even though wokeness is definitely a phenomenon that is on the left and not the right.
Yes.
That you were criticizing Jordan Peterson. I think you also talked about James Lindsay, because they both characterize wokeness as a Marxist, something that's come out of Marxism or should be classified as Marxist. And you were saying you thought it should be classified as a form of left neoliberalism.
Yes, and that was also not just my own ideas. Few leftists came up with this idea earlier, like Walter Van Michels and I forgot now the name of the other guy. Anyways, traditional Marxism or traditional leftism is about the economy, right? It's about somehow fighting capitalism in a sense that that you try to basically just have a more, how to say, not necessarily equal distribution, but that those who actually produce get a bigger slice of the cake, who actually work. That's the point, right? That those who actually work and produce get a fair share for what they are doing. Ownership. Yeah, right. And then we have but anyways,
people are entitled to their fruits of their own labor. Is that what you're looking for? Like people are entitled to the fruits of their own labor. That's a very capitalist perspective.
Right. Yeah. Right. Anyways, it's whatever your position may be on this, it's about these kind of economic things having to do with work and labor and stuff. And that was what leftism was traditionally about, right? It's a workers' movement. And that's no longer the case with wokeism, right? The economic struggles, which are, I guess, still very important, especially in America, where labor is becoming less and less worth, right? It's very simply put, how much do you get paid for actual labor? And in the US, you don't really get paid a lot for your actual labor, right? But that's no longer the core fight. And if you shift the fight, if the left kind of forgets its core issue and is replacing it with other issues, then you have all this kind of woke washing, and you have every corporation is now super woke, and wokeism is now basically promoted and appropriated by the big corporations and by, let's say, the establishment, the political and and the economic establishment, and therefore it's not left. I think it is a sellout of the leftist struggle.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
and again, that's not an original point. Others have made this point before I did.
Well, I mean, like, you could have like they talk about this with environmentalism too. You know, there's the greenwashing, right? You know, and it's like, or you know, you go to the grocery store and there's like a million things that say they're organic, and you know, who knows if they're really organic or not. And I mean, I think you can say that like if wokeness comes from a specific philosophy, that's a little different than if a corporation sort of, you know, takes the mask of that on. You know, they sort of paint the blood on their door, you know, like the ward off the 10th plague or something. Like if corporations want a woke signal for whatever reason, I mean, I think that would be a separate thing than whatever the ideology or the origin point of the ideology, the basis of that, I would separate that from like whether corporations sort of wear this fake mask of wokeness. Like, I don't think, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think corporations using wokeness would have anything to do with whether the ideology of wokeness comes from a neoliberal or a Marxist perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Yeah, but doesn't that prove my point? That it's not leftist?
I don't know how so.
Because like if the corporations can appropriate it very easily and profit from it very easily, doesn't that show? And if it's good for them making more profit, doesn't it show that it's not a leftist thing?
Well, you're defining leftist as like a workers' movement.
Yes.
Normally, when we talk about leftism, we talk about socialism or the abolition of property rights specifically.
Yes.
For, I don't know,
well,
some people you say leftist and they just mean left politics. So,
well, and I guess more than that is that because I feel like it sounds like you're conceptualizing leftism in this sense as a purely an economic issue as opposed to a social. There's also like, I mean, I would say there's also social cultural issues that are on the left. And I mean, the corporations are definitely adapting these left social cultural attitudes, even if they're not adapting the economic ones, which I agree they're not.
Yes, that's exactly the point I'm making. And that's why I'm saying, so we use the word left differently. That's maybe and it makes sense to use the left in the way you use it, because that's actually what has become of the left. Right. But my point is, they shouldn't call themselves left anymore. It shouldn't be called left anymore. It's a misappropriation of the word. To be fair, if you look at it historically, originally the left, where the term actually comes from, is from the French Revolution, where they had this kind of parliament, and then on the left side were the Republicans, that is, those who were most against monarchy. And on the right were those who were still most in favor of the monarchy. That's how they had the seating order in this parliament. And so the left ones were the progressive ones who were for abolishing the monarchy altogether. So in the beginning, left was basically a political issue having to do with a republic monarchy conflict. And then soon after, in the 19th century, left and right was kind of was understood in the sense that the left were the ones who were the Marxists, or who were for public property more, and were for workers' rights. And on the right were those who were the employers and the capitalists. So that's a development of the meaning of left, which shifts away from purely political to more economic issues.
Right.
And now we have this shift away from the economic issues in the way you describe it towards this kind of moralistic civil religious towards this moralistic civil religious meaning. And when now is to be left is whatever in favor of LGBTQ and these kinds of things, right? No, which is no longer really economic.
Well, I think, I mean, I'm glad you brought it up. I think it's a good way of conceptualizing it. Because I was thinking about this the other day, and I kind of thought it was similar to the divide between, or not the divide, I guess the evolution or change of liberalism versus neoliberalism. Because like liberalism
Right.
is a political philosophy, and then neoliberalism comes along later, and it kind of uses the framework and the argument of liberalism, but not for politics, for an economic system.
Right.
And that's kind of how I see wokeism, is that they basically, it's like the inverted version of that. They took like a lot of the economic arguments of Marxism, like, conflict theory and false consciousness and cultural hegemony and things of that, and they kind of remove the economic element, and they put back in they put a social element into it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay. So would it be
100% agree?
Would it be fair to call it? I mean, I guess neo-Marx is like a term that's already used to describe something else, but I mean, is that the hang up, is just to call it, you don't like to call it Marxism?
No, I wouldn't call it Marxism at all, because Marxism is, in essence, and I don't agree with many things of Marxism either, but it definitely is in essence an economic theory.
Right. What should we call it?
Yeah, I don't know. Civil religion. It's a civil religion. Yeah.
I think someone suggested calling it critical social justice, which maybe that's more akin to, I mean, I don't think anyone knows what that means, but.
Are you conceptualizing a political spectrum where workers are on the left and owners are on the right?
That was traditionally, like when I grew up, that was still the case. That's still how the kind of political thing I grew up in Germany. Like there was still like, this was like the 1970s, there was before Thatcher, which was still an economic thing. So the main political but some of the main political struggles when I was young, like a teenager, was unions, trying to get higher wages for the workers. That was still like a very big thing at the time.
Yeah, the political spectrum thing is super interesting to me. Obviously, you brought up the origin of the left-right political spectrum with societal change, and you can see people on the left are much more like less weary of change than conservatives are, obviously, on the right. So I conceptualize that as a political spectrum. The economic spectrum, I usually it seems like people on the left are less weary of state power, and they want to nationalize things and whatnot, but people on the right are less skeptical of corporate power. So there seems to be a dynamic between left and right, state power versus corporate power. But when I think of workers versus owners, like what is that? What is a single factor spectrum? What is that really measuring? I don't necessarily know. I have to think about it more, but it's an interesting dynamic. I've never really heard left and right conceptualized that way. It seems like a single issue type thing. So,
well, it's not really a single issue type thing. It's because according to Orthodox Marxism, this is the base structure of society. And everything else, whatever, education, religion, anything, is, according to Orthodox Marxism, in the service of this base structure.
Right.
So if that's the economy, and how the mode of production, right? How things are produced and who benefits from the production, right? Does most of the profit go to the actual producers or to those who own the means of production? That's very basic Marxism, and this question is seen as the basis for everything. Again, like education, law, very importantly, right? Social manners and so forth, that they all kind of in the service of supporting this base structure, this economic base structure.
So maybe the political spectrum is like a level of societal inequality from individual to individual. Like on the right side of the spectrum, the right is more comfortable with extreme inequality and the left is more comfortable with lower levels of inequality. Maybe that's what you're measuring.
Yes, that's one of the things. But I'm not a big fan of the notion even of equality, and I don't think it's. The point is just like very simple, that that again, like those who produce, who actually work, who actually labor, they should be fairly rewarded for this, and they should own the means of production. That's even the point, right? That but they own it not individually, because that's impossible. They own it collectively, right? If that was the idea, you have whatever, like industrial production in the 19th century, which was the main thing that they were talking about, or mines, whatever, mining and these kind of things. And the whole point is that those who labor there, who do all the work, own nothing, and that's fucked up. That shouldn't be the case, right? The actual workers who produce all the wealth should also be the owners of the wealth. Now, that's not really possible if you have single individual ownership, because this is mass production. You can't really have a modern society where just everyone has their own little workshop, one person working. So the only way that those who actually labor, those who actually work, own own both the means of production, own the tools they work with, which they don't, and own the things that they produce, whatever the coal they mine, is in a collective way. It's not about abolishing ownership. To the contrary, it's about making the people who actually work own what they work. That's the basic idea. And this is like this whole idea of alienation, right? That which comes from Hegel. If you go to the philosophy, back to philosophy, that you have this state of alienation, that you're alienated from your work, means you own neither the tools you work with nor the products you produce, and that's alienation. And that state, according to, and it's not about equality. It's in order to remove this alienation state in the mode of production, in how things are made and how wealth is produced. That's the basic idea.
Well,
and sorry for one last sentence, and that's still the idea of leftism I have from the 1970s, because it's precisely about this. It's in Germany. Germany had very functioning. We had like a huge economic growth with very functioning unions, unlike the US. And it was about giving the workers a greater Mitspracherecht. They had all these. They were running the factories to an extent. In the 1970s, still in Germany. That was what it was about, to give the workers a much greater stake in the running of the companies.
I would say that the economic inequality is the real focus, and that the alienation argument is kind of just a rationalization that sounds good after the fact. That's the way that I would conceptualize it myself. But obviously, I'm sure you know the problems with collective ownership, and there's kind of a tragedy of the commons thing that goes on. So they tend to,
I agree,
develop worse management.
Yes.
Well, I don't want to have I don't want to have a long argument about co-ops or anything, Adam.
No. I'm curious, because you've never done a video on Marxism or anything like that. A lot of people think that you are like a Marxism or a Marxist or a secret Marxist. You don't strike me as someone who, if you were a Marxist, would keep it secret. So.
Well, I'm not 100% Marxist. It's not my kind of foundation, but I sympathize. We can have a discussion about this on with socialism. Simply, but we probably have a very different understanding of this. I mean, I lived most of my life in functioning socialist under functioning socialist conditions. So again, I'm talking here about the Germany of the 1970s,
Okay.
where large part, which was economically hugely successful, more successful than the US, right? I mean, we were like totally destroyed in the Second World War, and then I had this Wirtschaftswunder, this economic miracle, partly with the help of the US. But nevertheless, the basic economic system was very socialist. That means that large parts of the economy were somehow publicly run. That's whatever, the postal service, all of the education until today.
This is
public.
in West Germany, right?
Western Germany. Many of the banks were like cooperative banks. The energy system was staying. Or the traffic, the public transport was all basically publicly owned. So, and it worked very, very well. And the standard of, there are other factors, of course, but it was a very functioning in this way. Basically with a large part of the economy being public. And then similarly, I don't know if that's I'm allowed to say this on American YouTube, but I mean, China, right? I came to China as a young student in the 1980s and lived there for several years. And I saw this development, this amazing economic development, which is unparalleled in the world, where you have like within just 10, 20, 30 years, you have hundreds and hundreds of millions of people basically starting on the level of India and then reaching the level of India with the same kind of 1 billion number of people getting close to the state of the US within 20 or 30 years. And it's all based on large parts of the economy being kind of publicly organized, right? You have public education for, I don't know, hundreds of thousands. You go to an American university, see where all these Chinese students are, but they come from a public education system. For hundreds of thousands of students out of poverty, you have the public transport system, which is amazing, right? The bullet fast trains with 300 kilometers per hour, like thousands and thousands of kilometers throughout the country. I don't want to idealize China. There's lots and lots of political problems, but we're talking about economy here, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the point I'm trying to make. In my personal life experience, both in Germany and in China, I'm only speaking about the economy, I witnessed the immense efficiency of a kind of socialist economy. It's a myth that it doesn't work. It's a myth. To the contrary, if it's done well, if it's done in the right way, I think it works better than capitalism. Well, but again, this is more my own experience. My background is these other things that we talked about earlier.
I've read that China, even though that it's like a central planning type economy, I've heard that they do one of the things that's made it so successful is that they have introduced market forces and price incentives and stuff like that, which are the hallmarks of capitalism.
Absolutely, and absolutely, and you have to have the right mixture. You have to have the right mixture, which was both the case in 1970s Germany and in China. You have to have the right mixture between capitalism and socialism.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess this is just maybe our bias because we generally conceptualize. So in America, and us in particular on the show, we generally conceptualize socialism as the abolition of property rights, which is the like extreme state-run everything. Because a lot of times in American politics, I mean, if you just want to talk about, universal health care, which most European nations have some form of, the Conservative Party here they're calling you a socialist already, which I don't think is helpful. Sure. Yeah. Because like you said, it's the right mix of public and private entities working together, and obviously the right incentives, because incentives are what matters.
Right.
Sitch, you want to?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because like when in America, like, post World War II, from, the 50s to the, or late 70s, I guess, we had I mean, America, the economy was not anywhere near as worker owned as how you're saying Germany was or West Germany was. But we had much more, like our unions were far stronger. Labor had way more power in America.
Yes.
And then it seemed like, because, in the 80s, you had the inflation crisis that came about. And basically, you had Reagan in America and
Yes.
Thatcher in the UK. And they
Right.
it seems like a lot of these economies switched over to the neoliberal model.
Exactly.
Essentially. And it's weird because it was like it's almost like in the 50s to 70s, it seemed like, the left, at least in America, had a lot more control over the economy.
Exactly.
The right had a lot more control over the culture. The culture was far
Exactly.
more like traditional.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
when, I don't know, but maybe in the 90s, I don't know, some flip occurred where once the economy kind of switched under the right's control, it seemed like
Yes.
the left kind of seized control of the culture.
Yes,
And-
exactly.
Yeah,
and that's
right
terrible.
now- yeah, and it seems like right now, and I'm sure this bothers you. I think it bothers a lot of people on the left who are more economically minded. That it seems like the Democrats in America and a lot of the left, individual left people and left YouTubers have sort of just thrown away sort of a lot of the economics of the left and just completely fixated on these social culture issues.
Exactly.
And it seems like the politicians are very happy to do this because it's much easier for them to fixate on these cultural issues that don't really they don't cost any money to change anything.
Exactly.
To do anything.
Yeah.
It's just it's easy to sort of say like we're going to fight racism or sexism and do nothing.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
As opposed to actually implementing some economic policy or something to that effect.
Exactly. Yes. That's I couldn't agree more.
Mm-hmm. Is there any let's see if I can get you into trouble. I think you made a lot of headways early on your YouTube videos because you made a video criticizing Philosophy Tube. Are there any other YouTubers that you want to criticize or are not really a big fan of, or you think they're kind of wielding philosophy incorrectly?
How do you feel about the YouTuber Vosh? I mean, he's a Marxist too. Can we get you to publicly denounce Vosh on our show here?
Actually, I have to apologize. I don't know him well. I watched a little bit of your show with him and of the conversation you had with him, but I don't know enough to make any kind of intelligent comment on that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. No,
and the other YouTubers, see, I don't really like that too much to to do these negative videos about other YouTubers. So but you have to do it. I know it generates a lot of attention.
Right.
And, this Philosophy Tube video in the beginning, that was ridiculous, right? That was I was using this in class. I had no idea about the channel. This is how my channel became famous.
Right.
And then my PhD student who was sitting in the class was saying, "Oh, we should do a video about this," because I had introduced the Philosophy Tube video on Kant in the class that this is not good. And I explained them why. And then he said, "Oh, let's do a video of this." And then we did the video, and then we posted it. And then on the very same day the video got posted, the Philosophy Tube presenter, now named Abigail Thorne, came out as trans.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Oh, no.
And that got 1 million something views, like Abigail Thorne's, and ours, because of then the algorithm, we got hundreds of thousands of views for this video. So overnight, because of that's how the channel became successful.
Yeah, I had no idea that was why it got sucked up in the algorithm.
That's the only reason why.
That's so bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, were you watching earlier? We were watching part of that conversation between Vosh and Dr. Tom about gender. Is that what you were watching?
No, I wasn't watching that. I was watching this whatever 2 weeks ago or so.
Oh, okay.
You had some older stuff.
Violence? Yeah.
Yes, something like this. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Do you have any opinions about the what is a woman gender conversation?
Actually, that's my new project. I'm working on this. Yes.
Interesting.
And of course, I look at it also from the authenticity Profelicity perspective.
Oh yeah, of course. Right.
Yes. So I think so. To put this very generally, in the past, of course, we had gender roles, very obviously, right? And now we have gender profiles, and people have to form their gender profiles. And again, it's the same thing. We still, the vocabulary is still all this authenticity, finding yourself, being yourself, but that's not how it's actually working, and especially not with the transgender topic, where this, I think it's the same for all genders, but in transgender, it's becoming extremely obvious, the contradictions there, right? That you're actually creating a gender profile, and everyone has to do that. And we're still having the authenticity vocabulary to describe this, but what we're doing is actually very different from what the vocabulary says. So I also think that gender very clearly, and this becomes very obvious again with regard to the whole transgender theme, which is so big in the media, that this is a form of also building a profile identity, and gender has always been at the center of building identity. So for me, the whole transgender thing is an expression, again, of the transition from authenticity to profelicity. And since gender and sexuality is so essential to identity, it's not a it's very close at hand that this topic comes to the fore in the way it does.
That's true.
Yeah, so I think that's something that kind of fascinates me, the whole gender topic right at the moment. And of course, it's like with social media, there are lots of problems attached to it, right? We have all now these how people basically now I don't know what the right word in English is, not obsessed, but how they are preoccupied with high pressures of creating their identities, presenting their identities, and they invest a lot in it, right? They're willing to whatever have surgeries that are like highly invasive, and that's a lot. Can you imagine this? I mean, what kind of psychological and biological and personal investment is going on there? So I think that's a fascinating phenomenon. And then how society reacts to this, how society, this is the other side of it, how society still tries to kind of salvage the authenticity vocabulary, right? It's like in increasingly grotesque ways, if you know what I mean.
Are you going to write another book? Are you going to write a second book, or are you working on another book?
That's why I'm working on this topic, and of course it's highly controversial, right? The topic. So I hope I'll find a publisher.
Yeah, you'll probably get canceled for.
It depends. I guess it depends what you say, whether it's controversial. Or not. You might actually enjoy this conversation. It's pretty funny because it's a YouTuber who I didn't think about it until you were talking about it just now. It's a YouTuber who I would say is kind of being very engaged in sophistry, who's obviously primarily fixated on like their profile. And they're kind of having this debate, and he started talking to a philosophy teacher who is not really focused on their profiles, more focused on what they think is like the truth or the authentic truth. And it's kind of interesting to see sort of like these two completely different forces butt up against each other and not be able to communicate at all.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. It's an interesting video. You'll probably get a lot out of it because he is like a philosophy teacher, and they're debating the topic of what is a woman. So
I see. Yeah, please do send it to me. I'm interested in that.
Yeah, he goes into the philosophical underpinnings of categories, and the person he's debating is not even willing to admit that there's a difference between objects and the categories and the symbols that define that represents the category, or the object.
Okay, cool.
So, anything else, or I mean, you've kind of answered all my questions. It's
Yeah, I think you've answered all my questions.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, it was. It's been a great conversation. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah,
on the
thanks
show.
for coming on. This was great.
Yeah, we will.
And please do
If you
send
wanna
this.
if you wanna come on talk about gender at some point in like a more deep and more depth when you like get
Yes.
more into your book, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, that would be that. Let me think a little bit more about this,
Mhm.
and then we can discuss that. That would be great.
I have your book is super fascinating to me. It's difficult for me to recommend it to people because so many people are anti-woke, and I think you unironically cite Judith Butler in the book, which is like
Yeah.
which I got to admit that's the first sighting of Judith Butler that I thought actually, made logical sense. So I'm much more open-minded about this stuff. Some people are so tribal these days. It's like, obviously.
Yeah, kind of ironically quote her. It's about this book she wrote, giving an account of yourself, and I switch it to because she didn't intend it in this way, because now we're basically all giving an account ourselves in the sense of a profile, right? Everyone has their different accounts.
So maybe I misread it. Are you saying that Judith Butler was wrong or correct in her assessment?
It's a little bit like tongue-in-cheek.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I didn't get that. So.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Now you can
All right.
recommend it to more people.
Maybe I can.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for coming on. This was a fascinating talk. Obviously, do you
Yeah.
want to pitch your channel or anything before you take off?
Plug your stuff.
Yeah, I don't really know how to do that. Carefree monitoring. Yes. Check out my channel.
I know it seems so odd, especially in an authenticity. It seems so inauthentic to
Give
do
us
that.
your profile.
Yes. But I like Profelicity. I don't mind it. I just not really that much.
Well, actually, I had one more question I just forgot, which is like people generally classify, authenticity as like a moral position, and putting on this facade of, the Profelicity, like an immoral position.
Right.
But you're
exactly.
talking about it like in a very neutral way, right? You're not.
Yes.
Do you give any credence to the people that think authenticity is more moral?
Well, I think we all grew up in the age of authenticity. I don't know about you. I don't know exactly how old you are, but at least I did. So in that sense, it's something that I still built my identity with, and most people did it. But at the same time, I think it's entirely paradoxical and actually impossible to be authentic, right? We learn authentic, like with a Vieta, from someone else. And the more intentionally we try to be authentic, the more obvious the paradox becomes, right? So I see through the paradox of authenticity. That's my own personal experience. And so I do not share the moralistic approach. And again, the morality, sorry for again you responding to the question in such a kind of long-winded way. I think morality follows the mode of the reigning mode of identity. So back in sincerity times, it was a morality of honor, and everything that was morally good was related to fulfilling your role. Right? Again, like a morality of honor. You have to be whatever, a virtuous wife, and you have to be whatever, an honest shopkeeper, or you have to be a brave soldier. It's all related to how you live up to your role. And then the whole moral code changes with authenticity. You have to be true to yourself. You have to be original. You have to be creative, and all these kind of things. And it has to be, you always have to truly express your inner whatever, right? So for me, I'm an amoralist or whatever. Morality is relative to the way we define our identity. And since we live in an age of authenticity, even though it's we're in the transitioning to Profelicity, we still kind of our language and our thinking still reflects this morality of the regime of authenticity. Right. But I don't share it. I look at it. I share it in the sense that I grew up with it, that I understand it, that it's part of my life. But as a philosopher, I can distance myself from it, and that's why I'm an amoralist. I'm critical towards this whole kind of indoctrination of values of authenticity, even though at the same time I grew up with them, and therefore they're part of myself.
Right. Yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're saying. I mean, and this could be my own bias too, because I did grow up very much. I mean, I'm younger than you, but I definitely, at least where I grew up, in the culture and in the media that I consumed, it was very much like, be yourself, be yourself, be yourself.
Yes.
Very authentic, shoved down your throat. So I guess and maybe it's unfair of me to characterize or categorize things this way, but I think of like authenticity and being yourself on Twitter is like someone, writing a long tweet where you sort of explain like a complicated, nuanced situation, which, no one reads or cares about, versus like
you're right.
Constructing the profile is like giving like the one sentence, very low resolution, like very tribal kind of thing that everyone, likes and retweets because it's so broad and vague that everyone kind of interprets it however they want.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Right.
And bring us back.
Yeah, but I see that as like bad. It's like a bad thing.
You see, that brings us right back to the beginning of the conversation. Yeah. Of the 10-year-old girls who experience this contradiction, and then they can't cope with it.
Right. That's it. I mean, it's interesting because I never really conceptualized like I think with like a lot of what Haidt focuses on with kids is that the stress is that they feel like they have to be constantly on. Like it's like you're constantly in a social group as opposed to having.
Yeah, I think it goes much deeper. They have to build an identity because they don't have one yet, and they're just like 10 years old, and they have to build it in the form of a profile, and then they get criticized because they're not authentic enough.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. That there is this weird contradiction that they can't really wrap their minds around.
Yes,
Haidt does recognize that you can't pull them away from social media because it's cruel that all their friends are experiencing social media and they're not participating in it. So he does at some level recognize the problem there. All of his friends are building an identity in this new way, and they have to participate. So he's advocating that no one builds that idea. Like you take that tool away from everyone and kind of solidify the realm of authenticity on the younger generation. But it seems like those are the ages that you really are building your identity, no matter whether you're sincerity, authenticity, or profelicity.
Yes.
Like trying to build an identity, when you're 30 is like, I mean, yeah, most of your identity building is done in your teens and 20s.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
So people in chat want us to ask him the questions that we're not. I mean, this is like a professional type. I mean, obviously he's a respected author and
if you want to answer joke questions, that's fine.
YouTube.
You let me know.
Just if I'm okay. Try. I'm not sure if I'm good at it. I'm good at it.
Yeah. The first question, I'm not going to ask. The first question is
no. You have to ask the last one.
Do you think that you could defeat a horse-sized duck in a fight?
A horse-sized duck?
Yeah. If a duck was the size of a horse, could you defeat it and kill it if you had to?
I don't know. I mean, this depends, right? I wish I would be able to. Yeah. I don't know.
You have to say, what do you think? Yes, the horse-sized duck is coming for you. It's going to kill you. Are you going to manage to defeat it, or are you going to get eaten?
I imagine myself, doing a bold picking. What's the English word? I know. I imagine myself like kind of a knight defeating the beast.
Nice.
Wow.
Nice. Okay.
Wow.
Based every other person except for me. Me and you are
I
the only
know.
ones that think we can take the duck. Everyone
I
else
know.
thinks they're going to lose.
Yeah.
We all accept our fate as
No.
duck food.
Extra based. Okay. The second question is, are owls birds?
That's a good question. That sounds like a trick question. I would say, yeah, they look like birds. Fly.
Okay, good. That's
Why
the
not?
correct answer. It's not a trick question.
You
We had a
passed,
guest
yeah.
on who argued with us that owls were not birds, so now we have to ask everyone forever that owls are birds.
Now
Okay.
the last question is optional. So
You really want me to ask? I'm not asking.
well,
Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
I'm always amazed at how many people are really, they're gung ho to jump into the question.
The last
So
question is
it,
about,
it involves pornography, so that's
about-
why.
Okay, go ahead.
it
Yeah.
involves personal pornography consumption habits.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
The question is, do you, when watching pornography, do you view it like two people and you're sort of like voyeuristically watching them, or do you like put yourself in the place of, one of the actors, like as if it's you?
Well, if I would watch pornography, right? You have to rephrase it.
Yes.
Yeah. If I would prefer the option number one.
Okay. So like,
Really?
like
Okay.
other people. Okay. Gotcha. Interesting. It's
Yeah,
interesting
because I mean, I don't know, right? It's if I would watch it,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, people do weird things, right? And I don't necessarily.
I
Right,
like
you're
I
not
like that
a
perspective.
plumber
Right.
or a stepbrother or anything like that. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. This kind of stuff. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
That question is so interesting to me because almost everyone that I talk to about this, like no one conceptualizes that other people think about it in a completely different way than them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or that there's more than one way to think about it. Yeah.
Or yeah, exactly. Well, there you go. I think you may be one of our most based guests.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a big compliment.
So yeah,
That's a big compliment.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, we're looking
All
forward.
right.
We're looking forward to your next video. Thanks for coming on. Obviously, we do long streams on Tuesday, but we clip them out as standalone videos, so we'll put it up on our channel. So, and link to your
Okay,
channel.
thank
so.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
This was great, fascinating, and I mean, we
Yeah.
might ask you to come back on again because this is really
Yeah,
interesting.
I
stuff,
love to.
so-
I love to.
Okay, take care.
Okay,
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
you too. Bye-bye.
Later.
Bye.
Awesome.
That was great.
I'm
Yeah.
glad he answered the point question.
I
Shocking.
know. The chat is so. I mean, I got to admit, as soon as I saw him asking, I'm like, fuck. But
So there
yeah.
you go. But he answered it. That was very based.
Yes.
Very based.
Cool stuff, man.
Yes.
Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.